It was a Wednesday, the kind where the sky hangs low and gray like it knows something you don't. I'd taken the day off work because something had been clawing at the back of my brain for weeks now. An itch I couldn't reach, a feeling like I was being watched by my own life. So I stayed home. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone. Just decided to disappear into the background of my own house and see what happened when I wasn't supposed to be there. Around noon, the house was silent except for the occasional hum of the fridge and the soft creak of old wood. She had left that morning in a rush, barely kissed me, said something about brunch with friends from the yoga studio. I'd nodded, half awake, letting her go like always. But I didn't follow my usual routine. I stayed, waited. Time passed slowly. I felt like a ghost inside my own home, sitting in the guest room with the door slightly ajar, listening for something I couldn't name. And then it happened. The front door clicked open around 1:17 p.m. I checked the time like it mattered, like that would somehow make sense of it. She wasn't alone. I didn't recognize the voice at first, male, confident, almost laughing. The kind of voice that didn't belong in my house. I heard her giggle. Not the fake polite one she gives strangers. The one she used to give me years ago before she started talking to me like I was just background noise. They didn't go to the kitchen. They didn't stop in the living room. They went straight upstairs. She brought him upstairs. To our room. She didn't know I was there. They didn't even check. That's the part that stung worse than anything, how sure she was I wouldn't be around, how invisible I must have become to her. I moved like my bones had forgotten how to bend, crept up the stairs with my heart in my throat. I didn't go to the bedroom. I went to the room next to it. The office. I pressed my ear to the wall, and that's when I heard it. Her voice, soft and low, saying things she used to whisper to me when we were in love. Same tone, same rhythm, but not for me. Never again for me. I didn't go in. Not then. I left the house and drove until my knuckles hurt from gripping the steering wheel. Parked near a grocery store and just stared at the automatic doors opening and closing, people walking in and out like nothing in the world had changed. Like it was just another ordinary day. But for me, the world had cracked in half. I stayed gone until the evening. When I came back, she was in the kitchen, barefoot, sipping white wine like it had been a calm day. Her hair was tied up and she was humming. Humming. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just let another man inside our life, our space. You were out long, she said without turning around. I looked at her. Really looked. At the back of her neck, the way her shoulders moved, the way she poured the wine with one hand and texted with the other. Brunch run long? I asked. That made her stop. Just for a second. A twitch in her shoulder. Then she turned and smiled. Yeah, we ended up walking around a bit. It was nice. And that was it. That was the first real moment I knew, without guessing, without assuming, that she was lying to my face. There was no shake in her voice, no stammer, no guilt. Just a polished lie from a mouth that had once told me she'd love me forever. I didn't ask anything else. I didn't accuse. I just nodded, walked past her, and went upstairs. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling and let the image of her laughing with him burn into the back of my eyes. The next day, I asked my best friend Nate to grab a beer. And that's when everything changed. Nate met me at a bar on the edge of town. Not one we usually went to, not our regular spot. I picked it on purpose, somewhere unfamiliar, quiet, neutral. He showed up in a black hoodie and jeans, looking like he hadn't slept either, but not in the same way I hadn't. He looked nervous. Like his mind was somewhere else entirely, which was ironic considering mine had been doing laps through hell. We sat down. I ordered a beer. He got a whiskey, straight, and that's when the alarm bell in my head rang its loudest. He never drank whiskey. We talked for a few minutes. Small talk. Work. Sports. I didn't care about any of it. I wasn't listening. I was watching him. Every twitch of his fingers. Every glance at his phone. Every time he didn't meet my eyes when I asked something basic. The whole thing felt wrong. Like I was watching someone try to perform a version of themselves. And then I asked him the question that changed everything. You ever meet any of Madison's yoga friends? He froze for half a second. Just half. It was so subtle, so slight, but I caught it. The shift in his shoulders. The way his jaw tensed, just barely. He looked down at his drink, then back up, smiled like I was being ridiculous. No, man. Why would I? That lie was too fast. Too smooth. Just wondering, I said, sipping my beer like I wasn't tasting fire. But in that moment, my suspicion took root, deep and unshakable. And then I thought about that laugh. The one I'd heard through the wall. The voice I hadn't recognized. Couldn't place. But now, with him sitting across from me, the memory clicked into place like a key turning in a lock. It was familiar. Too familiar. It was Nate. He didn't even know he'd confirmed it. He didn't know that every word he said just wrapped another chain around the truth and dragged it out of the mud. I paid the bill early and told him I was tired. He nodded, relieved. Probably thought he'd passed the test. I drove home with my chest burning. A part of me still wanted to be wrong. Still wanted to believe this wasn't happening. That I hadn't spent years building a life with someone who could do this. That my best friend, my brother in everything but blood, wouldn't be the one to set the match to my marriage. But I needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I went to her phone. I waited until she fell asleep. I knew the passcode. She never changed it. I told myself if I didn't find anything, I'd put it back. I'd drop it forever. But I knew I would find something. My hands were shaking, but my mind was ice. I went straight to the hidden album in her photos. And there it was. A picture of him. In our bedroom. Wearing one of my shirts. Her hand was in the shot, holding a glass of wine, red nails. I didn't even realize she'd started painting again. The date was stamped 2 weeks ago. While I was out of town for a conference. She hadn't even tried to hide it well. Then I opened the messages. Not under his real name. He was saved as Claire. Cute. Like some twisted joke. They talked every day. Pictures. Inside jokes. Things I hadn't heard her say to me in years. There were voice notes, his voice, whispering to her like she was the center of the goddamn universe. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. I felt hollow. Like someone had scooped out my insides and filled them with static. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, staring at her face while she slept, peaceful like she hadn't just detonated my entire world. She didn't stir once. I thought about waking her. Shouting. Throwing the phone at her and demanding answers. But not yet. I had something better in mind. Something she would never see coming. Because if she could turn our home into a game, then I was going to play too. And I never lose. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My body was frozen in place, but my brain was sprinting through every conversation, every late night at the studio, every last-minute trip she took with the girls, every smile Nate had thrown my way when I wasn't looking closely enough. I didn't just feel betrayed, I felt stupid. Like they had been playing this theater in front of me for months, maybe longer, and I had been the only one too blind or too trusting to read the script. By sunrise, I had made up my mind. This wasn't going to end with a screaming match or me crying into a pillow. I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. She wanted thrill. She wanted danger. Fine. I was going to give her exactly what she was looking for, just not in the way she expected. The first step was her sister. Her younger sister, Lena. Now, Lena and I never really got along in the beginning. Too sharp. Too opinionated. Always had something sarcastic to say whenever we were in the same room. But about a year ago, something shifted. Madison started ignoring Lena's calls more and more. Said she was drama, needy. Always inserting herself where she didn't belong. That was around the same time I noticed Lena's eyes started lingering on me a little longer. Her smile held something else underneath it. Something knowing. After what I found in that phone, I knew I needed someone who could help me set the stage. And Lena was the perfect wild card. I texted her that morning. Need to talk. In person. It's about your sister. The response came less than 10 seconds later. Tell me where and when. We met at a cafe downtown. She showed up in a black coat, big sunglasses, and no attempt to hide her curiosity. As soon as she sat down, I slid the phone across the table, already unlocked, already open to the messages between Madison and Nate. Lena didn't say anything for a while. She scrolled. Her face twisted, then fell still. Then she looked up at me and said something I didn't expect. I always knew she'd pull something like this. I just didn't think it'd be him. That stung more than I admitted. Because if Lena saw it coming, who else did? She lied to you, Kyle. But I think she lied to me even harder. She always said I was the messed up one. The one who couldn't keep her life together. Guess she was projecting the whole time. Her voice was cold. Not angry. Just done. I didn't ask her to help me. I didn't need to. She leaned back in her chair, tapped her nails against her cup, and said, "So, what's your move?" And that's when I said it. She spent the night with my best friend. So I'm going to make sure her younger, more attractive sister doesn't sleep tonight either. I saw the flicker in her eyes. Not shock, not disgust, just a grin, wide, sharp, understanding. "Then I hope you're not bluffing," she said. And I wasn't. We didn't go back to my place. We went to a hotel, one of those upscale ones with tall windows and quiet hallways. We didn't talk much on the way there. There wasn't anything left to say. She didn't ask for an explanation. She didn't even ask me what came next. And that night, no one slept. Not because of what you think, but because we spent hours planning, plotting, dissecting every message, every timeline, every detail she could remember. Lena had insight I didn't. She knew where Madison hid things, where she went when she needed space, the names she used for her little cover stories. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was a full autopsy of the life I thought I had. By 4 a.m. I had everything I needed. I dropped Lena off just before sunrise. She looked at me before getting out of the car and said, "When you burn this all down, let me know. I want front row seats." And I promised her she would. Because the next part? That was going to be the performance of my life. Curtains were rising, the next morning was silent. She moved around the house like everything was normal, coffee brewing, music playing low from her phone, humming that same tune she always did when she thought she had the world under control. She had no idea that I had already stepped off the stage of the circus she'd built and started building my own set behind the scenes. She sat across from me at the table in one of my old t-shirts, hair up, phone in hand, pretending not to be watching me. But she was. I could feel her eyes darting up from the screen every few seconds, gauging my mood, looking for cracks. She sensed a shift but couldn't place it. That made her uneasy. "Good. You're quiet today," she said, sipping her coffee like it was just another day. I didn't answer right away. I just smiled at her, then leaned forward a little. "Do you remember that hiking trip we took in Vermont? The one where you said you lost your phone for a whole day?" She blinked. Took her time. That hesitation was her tell. "Yeah, why?" "No reason. I just remembered how peaceful you said it felt. Being off the grid. No distractions." She nodded slowly, lips tightening. "We should go back there sometime," I added. "Reconnect. Clear our heads." She smiled. Too quickly. "Yeah," she said, setting her cup down. "We should." But I was already ahead of her. That trip she lied about last year? I found the photos on her phone. They weren't of mountains or lakes. They were of her and Nate. Hotel mirrors. Restaurant dinners. A champagne bottle with his initials written on the card. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had vacationed in it. The plan was already moving. Lena had started dripping bait on social media, nothing obvious, just subtle enough to catch Madison's radar. A tagged photo here, a late-night caption there. One showed her in a hotel robe holding a wine glass with a view over the city skyline. I'd taken the picture. I was even reflected in the window behind her if you looked close enough. That photo went up at 2 p.m. By 2:17, Madison was in the kitchen, phone in hand, pretending to scroll aimlessly. But her eyes weren't moving like they were reading anything. They were frozen on the screen. Locked. The corner of her mouth twitched just once. I walked in. "Everything okay?" I asked. She jumped slightly. Then faked a cough. "Yeah, just looking at this article someone sent me." Lying came easy to her now. Like breathing. I moved closer, leaned against the counter. "You know what I've been thinking lately?" She tilted her head, playing calm. "What?" "That I miss how we used to be. When we told each other everything. When we didn't need passwords and silence and secrets." Something flickered behind her eyes. For the first time, the smile cracked. "Not much, but enough." "I still tell you everything," she said softly. That was her fatal mistake. I stared at her. Let the silence bloom. Then I said, "No. You really don't." And I walked out. Not in anger. Not slamming doors. Just quiet. Controlled. Because the game was shifting now. And she knew it. That night, she checked my phone while I slept. Or thought I slept. I watched her from the hallway mirror. She didn't find anything. I'd scrubbed it clean, but she searched longer than necessary. Scrolling. Digging. She was scared. She was trying to get ahead of something she couldn't name yet. But she would. Very soon. And when she did, it would be far too late. The fifth move was a trap disguised as a dinner invitation. I came home with groceries, steak, wine, her favorite roasted garlic bread, and told her I wanted to cook for her. She blinked, clearly suspicious, like a stray cat being offered a hand it didn't trust. But she played along. She had to. It was all part of the image she worked so hard to maintain, the loyal wife, the peaceful home, the loving husband who never asked too many questions. I cooked. She poured the wine. We sat across from each other like strangers who used to be something more. I watched her the entire time, how her smile pulled tight at the corners, how she kept checking her phone even though the screen was black. I knew what she was waiting for, a message, a response, some sign from Nate that he hadn't vanished. Because I'd made sure he did. I blocked Nate from every app she could contact him on. Spoofed his number and sent her a simple, cutting message, "Don't text me anymore. You're reckless and this is done." She hadn't stopped checking her phone since. Over dinner, I asked questions. Casual ones. Light, but layered like knives hidden in silk. Have you ever felt like someone close to you is hiding something? Do you think it's possible to love two people at the same time? Do you believe in karma? She answered them all with a fake laugh and a sip of wine. But her hand trembled once. I saw it when she reached for the salt. After dinner, she offered to do the dishes. I let her. I went upstairs, pulled out a small envelope and placed it gently in her jewelry drawer. Not hidden, but not obvious. Just waiting. Inside the envelope was a photo. The one Lena had taken of me in the hotel window reflection. With a handwritten note on the back. I wonder what hurts more. The truth you told yourself, or the one you're about to read. That was all. I didn't sleep that night. I pretended to. I waited for the moment she'd go upstairs. Open the drawer. See the photo. Read the message. I wanted to hear the sound of realization hit her like a falling chandelier. But she never opened the drawer. Not that night. She stayed downstairs, curled up on the couch, wine glass untouched, eyes locked on her phone screen like she could will a response out of Nate if she stared long enough. By morning, she looked like she hadn't slept either. I made coffee, poured her a cup, set it down in front of her. She looked up at me, tired, cautious. "You okay?" I asked, voice gentle. She nodded too fast. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well." "Something on your mind?" "No," she said, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine." I kissed her on the forehead. Because now I knew it was working. The silence, the cracks, the space between her lies that was growing wider and louder every day. She was unraveling, and I hadn't raised my voice once. But what came next? That would be the real fracture. Because Lena had just sent me the screenshot of Madison's latest search history, taken through the tracking app we'd installed on her backup phone weeks ago. She had searched, "How to tell if your husband is cheating on you." And that was when I knew. She was ready to confess. Just not the truth. She was going to twist it, flip it, try to frame me as the one who strayed. Because in her mind, if she could make me the villain, she'd never have to admit to herself or anyone else what she'd done. But I was ready. And I had one final piece to drop before the whole thing shattered. It was a Saturday when she finally made her move. I woke up to the smell of pancakes and the sound of music playing in the kitchen, something she hadn't done in over a year. It wasn't affection. It was theater. I watched her hum along to the song like she was starring in a scene she'd rehearsed all night. She smiled when she saw me, kissed my cheek, slid a plate across the table like nothing in the world was on fire. She had planned this. And she thought I was still asleep. "Sit," she said brightly, pouring orange juice like we were in a hotel suite and not living in a house built on broken glass. I sat. I didn't speak. Just watched. She took a breath, sat across from me, folded her hands like she was about to negotiate a hostage release. "I need to talk to you about something," she said. There it was. The script. "Sure," I said. "What's going on?" She gave a long sigh, like the weight of the world had suddenly landed on her shoulders. I've been feeling disconnected from us, she began. For a while now. I didn't want to say anything because I thought it was just a phase. But lately, I've had this feeling. Like something's changed with you. I tilted my head just slightly. What do you mean? I think, she looked down, played with the edge of her napkin. I think you've been hiding something from me. Maybe someone. There it was. She said it. I watched her face closely. She wasn't scared. She wasn't heartbroken. She was building. Laying bricks. Constructing a lie where she'd come out the hero, the wounded wife trying to save her marriage from a husband who had gone cold. You think I'm seeing someone? I asked flatly. I don't want to think that, she said quickly. But I found a few things that made me wonder. She paused, waiting for me to react. I didn't. I saw that picture Lena posted, she said, eyes narrowing just slightly. You were in it. Reflected in the glass. I smiled a little then. Just enough. Good eye, I said. She blinked. You're not denying it? No. The silence after that was sharp. You were cheating on me, she said, voice cracking, not from emotion, but from surprise. This wasn't how she thought it would go. She expected panic. Denial. She didn't expect me to hold the door wide open. I never said that, I replied calmly. I just said you had a good eye. She looked thrown for the first time. Really thrown. I knew something was off, she snapped. You've been cold. Distant. Always out. Always on your phone. I leaned in then, hands on the table. You want to talk about distant? About hiding things? About always being on your phone? She froze. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. Placed it gently on the table between us. What's that, she asked, already pale. That, I said, is every message between you and Nate. Every photo. Every voicemail. Including the one where you said you never loved me and you were just waiting until you had a good reason to leave. Want to play it? Her face collapsed. I didn't shout. I didn't throw things. I let the truth sit between us like a lit match on gasoline-soaked wood. You went through my phone? She whispered, voice brittle. You let my best friend into our bed, I said softly. So, yeah. I looked. She stood up fast, hands trembling, face flushed with something between panic and fury. You've been spying on me? Tracking me? I laughed, dry. I watched you lie to my face with wine on your lips and his hand in your texts. And now you're mad, I know. She stared at the USB like it would bite her. I made a mistake, she said suddenly. People make mistakes. You're not perfect either. Mistake, I echoed. This wasn't a drunk kiss at a party. This was calculated. Months of it. You had him in our house. Our room. You wore my shirt in one of your little photos with him. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. She tried to speak again, but I stood up. I'm not done yet. She froze. I already filed the paperwork, I said. You'll be served Monday. You can keep the house. I've already emptied the joint accounts. My lawyer will be in touch. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stood there, stunned, like the performance had ended and no one was clapping. I walked to the door, turned once more. Oh, and one more thing, I added. Your sister says hi. Then I left. Because the act was over. And I had one final curtain call left to take. I didn't go back home that night. There was no home to return to anymore. Not the way it used to be. I drove for hours without a destination, just windows down, city lights smearing across the windshield, the kind of quiet that didn't settle, just hummed under your skin. I kept expecting the weight to crash down, to feel the full impact of everything that had just burned, but it didn't. Not yet. What I felt instead was focus. A strange, cold clarity. I had shattered the illusion and now I had to deal with the ghosts left behind. Lena texted me around midnight. She knows. I sent back one word. Yes. She replied with a location. A rooftop bar downtown, one of those places with overpriced cocktails and a view of everything fake and glittering. I didn't dress up. Just showed up in the same clothes I wore to dinner with my soon-to-be ex-wife, smelling faintly of garlic and gasoline. Lena was already there, leaning against the railing in a long black coat, wind teasing her hair around her face. She didn't say anything when I walked up. Just handed me a glass of something dark and strong and didn't ask questions. For a few minutes, we didn't speak at all. We just stood there, two people watching the city breathe beneath them, both holding pieces of the same wreckage. She called me, Lena said finally. Let me guess, I said. You're the villain now. She called me a traitor. Said I was always jealous of her. That I ruined her life. Lena looked over at me. Like she didn't blow her own life to pieces and light a cigarette on the ashes. She said anything about Nate? I asked. Lena gave a bitter laugh. She said she doesn't even care about him. That it was just fun and she never thought it would go this far. Like he was a side dish that suddenly tried to sit at the head of the table. I didn't react. I didn't need to. My silence said more than any words would. Then Lena turned to face me fully. Her voice changed. Lower. Steadier. You should know something, she said. Back when I was 19, she told me I'd never find someone like you. She said I'd always be second place to her in everything. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was wrong. I know, Lena said, her eyes not leaving mine. And I think she knew it too. That's probably why she hated me more than anyone. There was something in that moment, something real. Not revenge. Not pain. Just two people who finally saw each other with nothing in between. I stayed at Lena's that night. But not like that. We didn't need noise. Or closeness. Or the heat of bodies trying to forget. We just sat on the floor of her apartment, sharing silence and whiskey, shoulders touching. She didn't ask me how I felt. I didn't ask her what came next. Because the truth was, I didn't know. I had walked through fire and come out the other side, but the smoke was still thick. My marriage was over. My best friend was a coward. My wife had turned love into a transaction. And now? Now there was only what I wanted to build. Lena eventually fell asleep beside me, her head on my shoulder, breaths even and light. I stayed awake a little longer, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had collapsed and everything I was finally free to start rebuilding. Not with rage. Not with regret. But with purpose. And the final act was coming soon. By Monday morning, the storm had found its center. She didn't expect to be served at work, that was intentional. I wanted the papers dropped in front of her on her turf, in front of her peers, in the very space where she played the role of the polished, powerful, put-together woman who had it all. The paralegal walked in, asked for her by name, handed her the envelope, and said calmly, "You've been served." That was it. The whole office saw it. No shouting. No drama. Just reality. My lawyer texted me an hour later. She signed for the documents. No response yet. She was silent all day. No messages. No calls. Not even a passive-aggressive social media post. It was eerie. But I knew her well enough to know what silence meant. She wasn't processing. She was plotting. Sure enough, by that evening I got the message. A long one. Paragraphs. Lines of emotional acrobatics, deflection, guilt-throwing, and desperate narrative control. She didn't apologize. Not once. Instead, she blamed the distance in our marriage, said she felt abandoned, and that what happened with Nate was a mistake made out of loneliness. She wrote that she hoped we could still part as adults, that there's no reason to destroy each other. She ended it with, "You're better than this, Kyle. You don't have to punish me." I didn't reply, because what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Nate had already cracked. See, I'd reached out to him one last time, not to yell, not to threaten, just to offer him a simple choice. Tell the truth, or I would make sure every lie he told burned down what was left of his career, reputation, and every relationship in his life. He folded in minutes. He sent me screenshots, messages, voicemails, confessions, a trail of digital breadcrumbs that painted a timeline so vivid. Even she couldn't twist it anymore. She had lied to both of us, played Nate like she played me, promised him things she never meant to deliver, told him they'd run away together, then told him to back off the second he started getting real about it. Turns out he wasn't the only one. There were others. Old messages buried deep in her archived accounts. Names I didn't recognize. Dinners I never knew happened. Nights she said she was with her sister or her friends or working late. Lies so layered, so routine that they'd become part of her bloodstream. Lena found them. She had access to more than I realized. Passwords from years ago synced to cloud accounts Madison forgot existed. It was all there. A decade-long highlight reel of deception. And it made everything I once thought was love look like a bad parody of trust. So I did something I hadn't planned. I sent Madison a message. Just one line. "You should sit down before checking your email." Then I sent her everything. All of it. The photos. The messages. Nate's audio confession. The receipts. I attached a personal note at the end. This isn't punishment. It's the truth. You just never expected to meet a version of me that wouldn't flinch when the mask came off. I turned my phone off after that. Went to Lena's again. She had a bottle of wine already open and said nothing when I walked in. Just handed me a glass and sat beside me. Later that night, I turned my phone back on. 6 missed calls. 3 voicemails. None of them from her. But one from Nate. He sounded different. Hollow. She's lost it, man. She's calling everyone, trying to spin it. Says I faked everything. She's threatening to sue me for defamation. Says I'll regret crossing her. But you know what? I don't even care anymore. I don't know what she's capable of now. Just be careful. That's when I realized she wasn't spiraling because she'd been caught. She was spiraling because she'd lost control. She'd built her entire identity around being the one who chose to leave. And I'd stolen that from her. I didn't beg. I didn't explode. I walked away, calm, clear, and 2 steps ahead. Now she was panicking. Now she was unpredictable. And as much as I hated her for everything she did, I knew I hadn't seen her final move yet. The explosion came on a Wednesday. Not literal, of course. But it had all the symptoms of a detonation. Shockwaves, damage control, and a sudden change in the air. I was mid-call with my lawyer, going over the next steps in the divorce, when I got the alert from Lena. 2 screenshots. One of her Instagram story, the other of a group chat she'd been looped into by a mutual friend. Madison had gone public. She posted a carefully worded, carefully pitched statement on social media. Long enough to look vulnerable, short enough to be digestible. It started with the usual weaponized self-awareness. I've been quiet the last few days because I've been going through something deeply personal. It's hard to talk about, but I believe in honesty, and I believe in taking accountability for your mistakes. But it didn't stop there. She framed the entire situation as a mutual separation where both sides had grown apart and were trying to move forward with grace. She wrote about how she wishes nothing but peace for me and claimed that she had always been faithful in heart, if not always in clarity. And the kicker? She implied I had been the one who stepped out first. No names. No specifics. Just enough suggestion to twist the story. She even dropped a line about suffering in silence while others moved on faster than expected. The comments were flooded with support. People praising her for her strength. For being mature. For not airing dirty laundry. And the group chat? That was the real knife. She had already preemptively messaged several of our mutual friends, feeding them a version of events where she was the betrayed one. Where I had emotionally checked out months ago. Where she was just trying to keep things together while I was out getting close with someone new. Lena. She was framing Lena as the reason. The homewrecker. The opportunist. The sister who always wanted what wasn't hers. And suddenly it all made sense. Madison didn't need to destroy me. She knew she couldn't anymore, but she could poison everything I reached for after her. She was going after Lena. Publicly. Privately. Aggressively. She wanted to isolate me. Make everyone suspicious. Make me doubt. But I didn't. I knew the truth. And more importantly, I had it. That night, I sat with Lena on her couch. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just held her phone in one hand and a glass of something stiff in the other and stared into space. She's not just broken, Lena said finally. She's strategic. Every move is layered. Every sentence is a thread she hopes someone pulls. I know, I said. But she overplayed her hand. Because what Madison didn't expect was that I'd already started recording. 2 nights before, when she showed up at my door unannounced. I hadn't told Lena. I hadn't told anyone. But Madison came over, wild-eyed, voice shaking. Not because she was sad, but because she knew everything was slipping. She begged for just one conversation, said we could still fix it, that everyone makes mistakes, that you don't have to throw away a whole life over one choice. And when I stayed silent, she snapped. She called Lena a leech, called me weak, Said I'd regret humiliating her. Said I'd never find someone who could handle me like she did. She tried to corner me emotionally, then physically. I recorded all of it, the entire spiral, the shift from manipulation to cruelty to desperation. So when she decided to take the story public, she didn't realize she was giving me permission to answer. And I was going to answer loud, with her voice, in her words, in her tone, with her threats ringing out for everyone to hear. But I wouldn't drop it yet, not just for revenge, for something better, something final. And when it landed, it wouldn't just clear the air. It would clear the entire playing field. Because the end wasn't coming. It was already here. It all ended in one single click. I didn't announce it. I didn't tease it. I didn't write a long post or wrap my truth in metaphors and emotional flourishes. I simply uploaded a 5-minute audio file to a private drive, attached it to an email titled The Unedited Conversation, and sent it to 12 specific people, mutual friends, her family, her colleagues, and a couple of names I knew had already been whispering about me behind my back. No caption. No explanation. Just her voice. Her voice saying it all. The manipulation, the threats, the fury, the moment she realized she wasn't in control anymore. The truth she couldn't dress up. No edits. No filters. Just raw, undeniable reality. It spread fast. I didn't track it. I didn't need to. People started reaching out within hours. Not just to me, but to Lena. Apologies. Backpedaling. Silent calls that hung up after one ring. Messages from people who had reposted Madison's bravery statement days earlier, now trying to scrub it from their pages and pretend they hadn't taken sides. She went quiet. Radio silent. For 3 full days. Then came the fallout. I got a message from one of her old coworkers, one I'd never spoken to directly before. She thanked me for sending the recording. Said it wasn't the first time Madison had played this game, just the first time she'd lost. Apparently, there had been whispers. Office tension. One previous intern who quit unexpectedly. The cracks had always been there. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the talking now. On the 4th day, Madison sent me a final message. Not rage. Not tears. It was short. You win. I hope you're happy. I didn't reply. Because she still didn't get it. There was no win in this. No scoreboard. No trophy for survival. This wasn't a game I wanted to play. I would have given anything to have never stepped into this arena in the first place. But when she dragged me in, lied, twisted, betrayed, and then tried to rewrite the story in real time, I had one choice left: to take control of the ending. Lena and I took a weekend and disappeared from the city. Somewhere quiet, small, unremarkable. No signals. No noise. Just space to breathe. We didn't talk about Madison. We didn't need to. There was something healing about watching the sun set without waiting for another shoe to drop. I don't know what Lena and I will be. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But what I do know is this: I found myself again. Not in revenge. Not in exposure. But in silence. In control. In the quiet power of truth standing without apology. I used to think betrayal shattered you. That it left you bleeding and paranoid and broken in all the places no one could see. But now I understand something deeper. Betrayal doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. And once you see who you are when everything's stripped away, you don't go back. You don't want to. To anyone reading this, if you're in that place, if you're living in suspicion, silenced by self-doubt, unsure whether you're crazy or just the only one not pretending, trust yourself. Truth doesn't knock. It kicks the door open when it's time. Let it in.